This is the Horse Radio Network.
I'm Stacy Westfall, and you're listening to the Dressage Radio Show, the Western Dressage episode. This is episode 572 on the Dressage Radio Network. The topic of today's podcast is impulsion versus speed. Simone Windeler joins me for the judge's view, and Frances Carbonnel joins me for the training tip. But before we dive into those interviews, Dini Swanson is here with me to discuss from some new developments in Western Dressage, including the largest breed registry in the world, recognizing Western Dressage as an official class. Hello, Dini.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing very well, and I'm super excited. I have a question for you. Am I entering my horse on the 4th of July in the first official AQHA Western Dressage combined thingy?
I cannot say that for sure that it is the absolute first, but it is definitely one of the first. We are really happy. We've got an alliance partnership with AQHA now, and the great thing for us is that they are awarding Western Dressage points, and they are using our WDAA trained USDF licensed Western Dressage judges.
Oh, I'm so excited.
So any licensed Western Dressage judge, all they have to do is fill out a couple of forms and join AQHA, and they can get a Western Dressage specialty card. And then, the shows that they judge can be AQHA approved.
That is awesome. It is so exciting for me to hear this because the AQHA, the American Quarter Horse Association, is the world's largest breed registry. And it's obviously in America, it is the largest association active here in the country. And there are so many horses. And for me, when I was showing last year in traditional dressage, it was super fun kind of to be like considered a non-traditional breed while I'm riding on an American quarter horse, because everything else I do with my quarter horse, we're the traditional thing in reining or the traditional thing in ranch riding, or like that's the horse that does that sport. So it was super fun to go out there and do traditional dressage and get AQHA points. So my horse earned, I can't remember, 14, 16. I earned quite a few AQHA traditional points last year. So to finally have this roll over into the Western Dressage, I am very excited because I think it could be really good for all the industries, because when somebody comes in and tries Western Dressage with their quarter horse, I think that making the leap over to try out the traditional might naturally happen too. So I'm just excited all the way around. I think it's a win-win-win.
Oh, absolutely. And the cool thing about it is that exhibitors demanded it. It was the major push came from quarter horse owners and exhibitors that they wanted this.
Yeah, that is.
And AQHA listened, and so it's a win-win for everybody.
It really is. And so I'll have to report back to you the next time we record, because I'll be going down to the Kentucky Horse Park and showing over the 4th of July weekend in this AQHA approved, if not the first, very early on show. So
Great.
Excited. Great. And then I heard that it's official about this podcast.
Your podcast is the official podcast of WDAA.
Yeah, this episode of the Dressage Radio, the Western Dressage edition, is the official podcast of the Western Dressage Association. And yeah, that's exciting for everyone, because I think it's a great way for them to get news. And I hope they're listening to all the episodes, because the crossover between the two is just, the training is so natural to listen to all the episodes, that I think it's a great thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we are friends and close relatives of dressage, of classical dressage. So it's all good.
It is. I love that. I love that the judges, all the judges I've interviewed so far judge both. And that's super fun for me because I'm showing in both, and it's just fun to hear it. Yeah. And I love that they're so related. And then I've heard that the plans are still on to hold the World Show. So can you give me an update on the World Show?
Yep. The board voted last week that we will hold the World Show. We hadn't said we weren't going to, but we were, kind of weighing what was going on in the world. Mm-hmm. And we sent out a survey to all of our members, and they were able to tell us if they were going to come, even with pretty strict, regulations and requirements of them. And we had enough that said, heck yes, we're going to come no matter what. So we will be holding the show. This is a USDF licensed show. So, there will be requirements, for face masks and social distancing and the such, but we have several months in between now and then. So who knows what it's going to look like at the end of September, but we will plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yep. I think that sounds like life right now.
And the dressage, just the way dressage works and Western dressage, we probably have it the easiest as far as social distancing goes. And, being able to follow those rules. And I spoke to our show secretary this morning, who is also doing that Kentucky show, Susan Peacock, and they have got it figured out. They are all digital. There is no contact. Even your exhibitor packet is waiting for you in your stall. You don't have to go to the show office anymore at all. They've really, kind of forced us to all think outside the box. Mm-hmm. And it's working. She's done it at several shows, and it's working great.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And that's having just been down to that facility last year, I can totally see how open air and very well set up it is for, being able to keep it to fit all the guidelines for the strictest places I've been. I could still see how you could easily do it in the way that whole system is set up down there. So I could see it happen.
Yeah, it should work. And then also we will be applying for AQHA approval for the World Show. So that'll be another place for people to get points.
That is so exciting. That's awesome. So that's three big things. The podcast is the official podcast of the WDAA, the Western Dressage Association of America. AQHA is now giving points to Western Dressage show, if they're approved and all that stuff. And so that was super nice. And then, World Show is on. That's awesome. Do you have anything else to add, or did we kind of cover it all for now?
I think we covered it for now.
Awesome.
Just, keep your eye open because we've got a lot of new stuff coming.
Very good. Well, thanks again for joining me. And if people want to keep, updated on the World Show or anything else, I'm guessing they go to Western Dressage Association of America.com?
Either www.westerndressageassociation.org.
Okay.
Or WDAA World Show.org.
Okay, .org. Very good.
Both will take it.
Awesome. We'll put links to those in the show notes. And thanks again for joining me.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
No words can describe the depth of the bond between a horse and his person. A kiss at the gate just before you turn him out. The soft touch of his muzzle on your hand as he scoops up the treat out of your palm. The warmth of his body under your legs as you saunter bareback across the pasture. The beat of his hooves as you gallop in perfect rhythm cross country. The sensation of flying as you clear the oxer. The sense of peace that comes over you as you walk together down the quiet trail. The sound of him contently eating his dinner. The feel of his warm, soft coat under your hand. The feeling you get when it's just you and your horse. It's why we do what we do at Kentucky Performance Products. This feeling is brought to you by AQUA Fight back against an energy crisis that can impact condition and performance. Equijewel is a high-fat, low-starch and sugar formula that was developed to safely meet the energy needs of your horse. The horse that matters to you matters to us.
Joining me for the judge's view is Simone Windeler, who's originally from Germany and now lives in Colorado. She's a large R Western Dressage Judge and a USDF L graduate. She's the past president of the Rocky Mountain Dressage Society, and she's managed numerous regional championships in Colorado and Utah. Simone is also a certified instructor with the RMS Classical Riding Academy in Germany. Her writing and teachings are based on a thorough understanding of biomechanics. And before I even begin, I'd like to thank you again for recording this a second time with me because I had a technical problem the first time. So here we go again, Simone. I'd like to discuss impulsion from the judge's point of view. So I'd like to know how it plays into the scores and just kind of have a conversation about the different expectations as the horses move up the levels.
All right. Where would you like to start?
I think I'd like to start with the idea of speed versus impulsion. Because I think that's something that I was, when somebody first brought it up, I'm like, oh yeah, I can totally see that. So kind of from the judge's point of view, is that a problem you see often, people mistaking speed for impulsion?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the challenge for us judges is to try to express in our comments, express it in a way where we don't get you to speed up. Because a lot of times if that's the comment that we make, the horse needs more impulsion, then people go home and just run them off their feet. And that's, of course, not what we were looking for. When you look at impulsion always implies that there is a moment of suspension, which means that you don't really see impulsion in the walk because the walk doesn't have a moment of suspension, right? You only have suspension when you go to the trot or jog or when you go to the canter or the lope. What you're looking for is you're looking basically for something that in a way looks a little bit like springiness, if you so will. And that really is impulsion. And probably one of the best ways to explain why impulsion is not speed is if we were to play music. If you think about a freestyle, and let's say you have a lengthening in there, a lot of times people or judges will then say, well, it needed more impulsion. It needed more forward. It needed more energy. It needed more this. But when you think about the music that plays for your jog piece in your freestyle, all you would have for your lengthening is a crescendo. You would not have a different piece of music, a faster piece of music. You would simply have a louder piece of music. And if you've ever watched a freestyle, you know exactly that as the audience, when the music starts to swell, you get all excited because you go, oh boy, here it comes. They're going to go across the diagonal and it looks like fantastic, right?
Yeah, it's so exciting because I'm thinking, now I've got to go watch Charlotte and Vallegra one more time looking for exactly what you just said.
Right. But you know it automatically. And I think that's one of the reasons why freestyles are actually so popular, both in the classical dressage world as they are in the Western dressage world. For the uninitiated audience, it's still something that's joyous to watch because you watch the music and the horse and it looks like the horse is dancing to the music. And it's something that even somebody that doesn't know what a flying change is, they can appreciate that. Whereas if you watch dressage all by itself, be it dressage or Western dressage, and you don't know anything about it, a lot of my friends that are not into horses have kind of compared it to watching paint dry, right? And you go, yeah, okay. I mean, all right. It's not that exciting, maybe. But impulsion is what makes it exciting. Impulsion is the difference between a ride where, as a judge, I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes, versus I want to get out of my judge's booth and push you a little bit.
So do you see differences in the mistakes? Like if somebody's showing and there's a struggle with impulsion, let's say in a basic test versus a 4th level test, can you kind of walk us through how those, what we might see different for, I don't know, maybe there's overlapping, maybe there's similar mistakes or problems that you see? Or can you walk us through kind of a comparison between the two extremes on like the basic level versus like 4th level in Western dressage and impulsion?
Well, if you have a more trained horse, which you would hope for at a higher level, then you would expect that the rider can, in a way, place the feet more. I think that's probably really what happens. As the horses gain more mobility up the levels, more impulsion, more up the levels, the transitions are supposed to get better.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard the supposed to, right? That is not always the case. And transitions is actually exactly where the impulsion most of the time is lacking. If you have no impulsion going into a transition upward or downward, it is very, very difficult to ride a good one. It's actually impossible to ride a good one, I should say. Now, I just said that you don't really have impulsion out of the walk. So in the walk, we talk about energy. But if you look at the description of what we're looking for in the horse, there is this wording of an eager horse that is willing to go forward, that looks like it really wants to do this, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you have that is really what impulsion implies, that the horse is eager to do that. And if you have good impulsion before and after your transition, then your transition is successful. Mm-hmm. What happens as you are going up the levels is the spots where you have to put your transition are getting more and more and more tight. Mm-hmm. So at the intro level, at the basic level, a lot of times, depending on what type of transition we're talking about, it says, do it between this letter and that letter. And it gives you a lot of room to place your transition and maybe, make a few more adjustments before you actually have to do it. When you get to level 4, it says, do this transition at letter whatever, B, E, K, M, and then almost immediately afterwards, do something else and then do something else. Right?
Yeah.
So you need to be able more and more and more to ride the hind legs. And that's really, when you think about impulsion, a lot of times I explain to people that what happens is as the horse gets more and more trained, they have the ability to stay on the ground longer with their hind feet. We call that increasing the deceleration phase. And as they are, it's almost like they're going into a little squat, if you so will. Mm-hmm. And the more they are able to do that, the lighter they get in the front. Mm-hmm. The more they have the ability to push themselves off in the front, the lighter they get in the front. And the additional effect that you have as a rider is the horse that has better impulsion and better balance is much easier to sit. Mm-hmm. So when you think about how the energy is transferred through the horse's body, you look at the hind feet going behind you, right? I mean, the hind feet are behind you. Mm-hmm. The more they come onto the horse's body, the more that energy transfer hits your spine in almost a vertical fashion. Mm-hmm. The more they are out behind, the more it hits your spine at an angle. The more it hits your spine at an angle, especially at speed, at jog or lope, the more it's going to move you around.
Mm-hmm.
So if the horse is very much underneath itself and that energy becomes very vertical, and that's what happens as the horse moves up the levels, the more vertical it gets, the easier it becomes to sit. And you can just sit there and smile and look super cool, right? When you look in Western dressage, we do not have piaffe, but in the classical dressage, we have it. And when you think about piaffe, how easy, if you've ever sat on a horse that piaffes well, how easy is that to sit?
Yeah, that's
a piece of cake.
That is really, interesting.
It's a piece of cake in comparison to sitting trot on maybe a basic level horse or an intro horse or even a level 1 horse where the hind legs are still kind of behind the horse, and the energy hits you completely different. And if you have a relatively smooth horse, maybe you can sit it well, but if it's a horse that, moves a little bit more in the back, it might be fairly uncomfortable.
The first thing it makes me think of is when I'm riding colts, and when I'm first riding them, they don't have strength and balance because they're in their first 5, 10, 20, 30 rides. And you're very correct. That's where, when I'm listening to you talking about the angle of that's where I'm thinking, oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I end up in a half seat standing kind of sitting is not an option because it's not going to benefit either of us. That's really interesting.
Exactly. And it's because the energy hits you in just not a good way. And so as you're training a horse up the levels, even a horse that was maybe more difficult to be able to sit on at the lower levels should get better. It should get easier to sit as it is more trained if it's correctly trained.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you have differences in horses depending on the breed. Some horses will always be a little bit more bouncy feeling than others, or even just within the same breed. One horse feels totally different than another. Of course they do. They are all individual. But if they are more and more and more trained, they become easier and easier. And yet you have the other thing that happens is as they are more trained and they optically start to actually look a little bit shorter because they're more together. The distance between their hind feet and their front feet just becomes shorter as the hind feet are able to step more underneath your seat bones. When that happens, they also become laterally a lot more mobile. So again, when you sit on your youngster, besides the fact that they wouldn't necessarily understand what a leg yield is, it would be very difficult to move them sideways intentionally. I mean, they move that way by accident, but you can't intentionally come across the arena on a really young horse like that because it's a scramble with the legs at that point, right?
Yes.
Whereas if you have a more trained horse, that's what you can do. You can start turning them sideways. You can send them sideways a little bit. You can make shorter turns, tighter turns in the Western world. We then have, as we're moving up the levels, we see these turns on the forehand, turns on the hind end that get tighter and tighter. And then we go into basically something that isn't quite a spin, but where they are allowed to keep the foot on the ground if we want that. And that you can't do that with a horse where the hind legs are away. It's impossible.
Now, when we were wrapping up the last time, I asked for a tip, and you said two things, and you've already mentioned part of it, which was the transitions and riding transitions. But you said something, and I'm going to let you phrase it because I was like, what? I want to go home and ride right now and find that out. And you had mentioned that I said, do you have any tips for people when they're showing? And you said, ride, and I'm going to let you say it, but you had advice on how to ride the transitions. Can you phrase that for me again?
Yes. So you always ride a transition in a way where you are starting the next gate, whatever the next gate is. So what happens is when it's an upward transition for people, that's easy. They all think, okay, I'm starting a jog, I'm starting a lope. But when they come from the lope to the jog or from the jog to the walk, then they always think about slowing down. And instead of slowing down, what you need to do is you need to start your walk. You need to start your jog out of that higher gait. Because if you do that, you have a completely different feel inside your body, and it takes that energy into the transition. And that's probably one of the biggest things we see in the transitions is that the horses just completely, it's like you let the air out of them.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it just deflates into that transition. And that's, you throw away a lot of points there. And when you look at your individual tests, what you will find is you will find a lot of tests where the transition scores are a separate score. And not just once in the test, it's several times in the test. And by the time you add them all up together at the end of the test, that can cost you 2%, 3% maybe, depending on how good or how bad they are. And just that different thinking, I always seems to help my students a lot. When I work with them, all of a sudden the walk looks like, because what you want to see, especially in the walk transition, I want to see that hind leg just go and march. Come down and march off. And normally what I see is they land on the front end and then they almost stop and then they walk.
Yeah, as soon as you phrased it, and then this time the wording that you used with deflating but as soon as you said ride, I think you're dead accurate about like the riding the transition up. I tend to think about like, okay, we're going to go from a walk to a jog. And that is but you're right that a lot of times I've thought about slowing down or stopping. And I probably could even check my mind and see whether or not I was actually thinking. I think that's why your phrasing caught me, because I was thinking, okay, stop jogging, instead of like slow this down. There was something that when you phrased it the first time about start the walk, and I was like, wow, that, and I hope other people had that experience, because I was like, what? That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And if people want to find you online, where should they go to find you?
They're going to find me at theelegantrider.com. So that's all one word. And that's where I'm at. That's where you can find out a little bit more about my teaching, my training, my judging, my horse show managing, all of those things that I do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to record this, not once, but twice. So thank you.
My pleasure. And I hope we'll do it again. We'll find another topic next time.
For sure. I'm really looking forward to a talk on freestyle. So I think I might have to talk to you then too.
All right. Sounds fantastic.
This week's dressage training tip is brought to you by Total Saddle Fit, home of the shoulder relief girth at totalsaddlefit.com.
With me today for the Trainer's Tips segment, I have Frances Carbonnel, who trains and competes in both traditional dressage and Western dressage. She has been involved in the horse industry for over 40 years, is also a founding member of the Western Dressage Association of America, which I keep stumbling on that name. She's a multiple world champion in the WDAA at the second, third, and fourth levels, which is the highest level there is right now in Western dressage. 5-time freestyle world champion, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And she also helped organize and develop the Western Dressage Train the Trainer seminar that has over 500 graduates. She's a USDF bronze, silver, and gold medalist, and very well qualified to be joining me today discussing the topic of impulsion. So thank you for joining me today, Frances.
Well, Stacy, this is a big honor, and I'm really flattered. I always am surprised when people want my opinion, so I hope I can be of use to you today.
Well, what I know is that I met you out at the Western Dressage World Show last year, and I was watching, you and your horse ride, and it's really impressive, and it was very fun. And I'm going to use a lot of self-control and not talk about freestyle during this one, but I'm going to have you back on for the freestyle edition of the Western Dressage podcast, because your horse and, the routine that you came up with, and I know that you do that as a profession, and I'm trying not to go down a rabbit hole, but it was amazing. It was inspiring.
That's probably the most joyful thing that I do on horseback. It takes a well-trained horse, and it takes some musicality and some creativity, and all of those things make it really, really fun. So I'd be happy to talk with you later.
Yeah, that will be a fun one to do. I'm looking forward to. But for today, what I'm really interested in talking to you about, I've been working my way up the training pyramid, talking about some of these different concepts, and the focus of today is on impulsion. And I'm going to make a guess, but I'd like your opinion on it. Is there confusion between impulsion versus speed?
Oh my, yes.
Okay.
And I will say that depending on the discipline that you're practicing, it can vary a lot. So what I like to tell people is that impulsion is the amount of energy that your horse willingly delivers to you to do anything that you want to do. So it's not a lazy horse. It's also not a really hyped up horse. It's a horse that's calm and relaxed, but ready to go and deliver an appropriate amount of energy for the work that you want to do. So it might be a little different if you wanted to do an extended trot or a jog, but it needs to be the appropriate amount, and it shouldn't be something you should have to nag and bug the horse about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now, is there because I kind of wonder sometimes, because personally, I'm playing around with the dressage concepts. Both I've been riding traditional and Western, and going to shows and getting a lot of incredibly valuable feedback on those tests that I really like. But is the quickness or the accidental speed, is that a natural part of the training process? Like, do horses make mistakes and accidentally go faster when you're trying to teach impulsion?
Well, of course they do. When they lose their balance, some horses go faster, some horses go slower. It depends on their temperament. But really, when you're talking about the amount of energy that they can reasonably give you, it's connected to balance. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of people make the assumption that faster is impulsion, but it's really not, because you can run a horse off his feet and destroy his balance and his confidence in the process, and create a lot of worry in your horse. Or you can slow that horse down so much, which you see sometimes in some of the jogging stuff, that people want to slow the speed down too much before they really have the hindquarters engaged and before they have the top line built. So they haven't really worked on the basic lower level of rhythm, relaxation, and that, to me, you have to find the natural rhythm of the horse.
I like how you just said that, because my mind was going down the road of impulsion and the problem of speed, which, when you were describing like running the horse off its feet, I kind of get this it always gives me this impression of like the horse, like when I was a kid and I'd run downhill, and then you realize at a certain point, like, your legs weren't able to keep up with the centrifugal, the force you have, the force of going down. You're like, this is not going to end well.
You think you're going to fall on your nose, and the horse does too, Yeah.
So. But what I really, really like that just was kind of a good little trigger for my brain was when you said when they go too slow too early, because I've experienced that in other places of training, but I hadn't actually lined that up into here. But I'm seeing what you're saying, meaning when you slow a horse down and they're engaged, that's when you've got this collection at a slower gait. And I think people, and I know myself when I was learning it, you don't understand how hard, slow, and engaged is.
Yes. Oh boy, that's so right. And you have to have a lot of You have to have a lot of time in the saddle, really patiently building the horse's muscles and top line to achieve that. They have to have a lot of balance to go slow.
Yeah.
When I've been in Andalusians for a long time, and when I first got my first Andalusian stallion, he was like the 5,000th horse in the United States is all they had in the registry. So, there weren't very many of them, and a lot of people didn't understand that they move differently than warm bloods do. And what you have with warm bloods when you're working regular dressage is that they have this natural cadence, and they have a lot of suspension and a lot of, it not necessarily push from behind, but a lot of bowing. And that cadence, which is really rhythm plus a little extra chutzpah, is something that they possess naturally. So do Frisians and some draft horses and stuff. But Andalusians have 16 trots. They're very adjustable. But the competition warm blood trainers were running these horses off their feet, trying to get them, quote unquote, more forward. And all they did was create a bunch of little sewing machines that were absolutely panicked. And actually, with those horses that need extra work on rhythm and regularity, you actually have to slow them down just a little bit because they're hot. They're hot horses. And if you let them go, they go pitter, patter, pitter, patter, pitter, patter. So you have to say, wait a second, let's find a little slower rhythm, a little bit more relaxation. Take a deep breath. Now, if you're riding something that's really lazy, then you might have to push that horse a little bit more than he would naturally want to go because he doesn't want to go very fast. He doesn't want to work that hard. But the point is that you have to observe the training scale so that you end up with, like at first level, it's the development of thrust. And that means push from the hindquarters that goes all the way through the top line into your hands. Now, thrust does not mean 90 miles an hour. It means that the horse pushes with its hindquarters and it goes all the way up to your hands softly.
Now, would that be an example like going from a halt to a trot?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. And you see that in the first level tests, that they don't they don't halt and then walk and then trot. They're supposed to trot off.
Okay.
And then that thrust then, as you begin to capture it and the horse gains more balance, you can start translating that toward collection. And I say toward collection because it's a gradual process. But again, this whole idea of the amount of available energy that the horse will give you is kind of what is a clue to me. You can see somebody riding a nice little test and the horse is going around do 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 do, but the judge will say needs more impulsion, and the rider is scratching her head going, I thought I was forward enough. Well, the horse might be pitter-pattering around, but he may not be engaging. He may not be pushing. He may not be using his top line and giving the rider very much of his available energy.
Okay. So, a word that you brought up when you were talking about the Andalusians that I think might be a clue to what I'm thinking about as you're talking is like adjustability.
Yeah.
So is that a key training thing that do you use adjustability? Because I've gone to maybe all of my riding lessons and had people be like, they need to be adjustable inside the trot. They need to be adjustable inside the lope. But they need to be. Is that one of the tools that you would use for impulsion then?
Sure. And that's achieved by 1,001 transitions.
Okay.
You don't just, what I see a lot of Western riders who are new to Western dressage do is they go lope, screech. And then they walk off, maybe after a couple of seconds. And the horse falls on his forehand. He props with his front legs, drops his neck, and they're all happy because he stopped quickly. But what's much harder is to do a lope to jog transition where the horse doesn't hesitate, doesn't fall on the forehand, doesn't drop his neck, doesn't prop with his front legs, but just goes seamlessly from the lope to the jog and goes forward in a very good relaxed rhythm, and you don't even hardly notice that the horse has shifted gears. That's the goal we're looking for. And so I do a lot of trot, canter, trot transitions, whether I'm riding a regular dressage or Western dressage, to develop that. And then once I have that, then I'll go back and I'll work on the walk to trot or the walk to canter. But and actually, when you're talking about the development of thrust, those are walk to trot is probably a good first level exercise for that. And then when you go walk to canter, you're talking about even more rock back on the haunches and push off. Now, go ahead.
Oh, good. When you're coaching someone and you're having them do those transitions, so if somebody's listening to this and they're riding at home right now, maybe because of the quarantine stuff, or maybe just because they're not hauling, weekly to a trainer, how specific would you have them be? Would you have them have like specific markers where they're trying to do these transitions at? Like how specific when they're riding these?
Well, thank you for leading into that, because, if you have even just a field to ride in, you can still be very precise in where you execute your transitions, and you need to learn to do that. Of course, in the beginning with the horse, when you have a green horse that's learning these things, it may take a little longer for you to achieve a good transition. You might ask and the horse might go, I'm not sure. You ask again, the horse goes, oh, I think I know what you mean. But he stops too soon and you go, whoops, let's try that again. So you put out a couple of cones and you say, in between these two cones, I'm going to make a transition. And then you go around to another spot in your field or your arena where you have a couple more cones up. And you say, okay, let's try that again over there. And little by little, as the horse gets better at it, you start saying, well, we're going to do it at the cone, not in between two cones. And the horse becomes more adaptable, more adjustable to your aids, and kind of catches on to the game. So then you have something that's, like you say, more elastic, more adjustable. And to me, then you can start thinking about moving up a little further in the training scale.
Okay, that's awesome. So question about, and that's a great transition, moving up through not just the training scale, but it's also the maybe as you're showing. So is there like, say you've got somebody who starts out and they work their way up and they get to like first level and then they're moving up to second level. Where do you see, I guess as we go up the levels, we're asking for, greater impulsion and things like that. Where do you see people tend to start to hit some walls with really having to, it feels like maybe there's really like, okay, there's a concept here you've got to really master before you can move to this next level. Are there any things you see like that?
Yes, I do. And, second level is considered the great watershed for most riders. 90% of riders in dressage never make it to second level. And part of it has to do with understanding how you teach the horse to engage the hind leg. And so you start with the push from behind in first level, which is done usually on big curved lines and on straight lines, so that you have an equal push from both hind legs. And that is very important, because if the horse has one hind leg that is weaker, then you need to do remedial exercises to help that horse. And that doesn't mean he's lame. It just means like you and me, where they're left-handed or right-handed. So when you get to second level, there's an exercise called the shoulder in. And there's so much misunderstanding about what shoulder in is intended to accomplish. I have a very talented rider that has been working on the whole concept of shoulder in for quite a while. And he for a long time struggled with what he saw from sitting in the saddle was what he thought he was supposed to see from reading and from listening to in lessons.
Mm-hmm.
But what he was getting was a lot of neck in and not much engagement of the hind leg under the horse's mass. Mm-hmm. So what has to happen in the shoulder in is the old concept of inside leg to outside rein. And boy, is that a mysterious idea. But the idea that the horse bends from the leg, stretches the outside of his body into the outside rein, and then allows the half halt to rock him back so that when he steps under with his inside hind leg, he rocks back and that hind leg bends and steps under his mass and starts to carry more of his weight. And it's in the beginning, it's a very short duration. A lot of times people do what they think is shoulder in, and they're kind of going neck in, or they're doing a leg yield, which is not the same thing as a shoulder in, but they do it they do it for way too long a time, and they teach their horses to actually disengage the haunch as opposed to engage the haunch.
Mm-hmm.
Or they teach them to fall on the outside shoulder if they're pulling the neck around too much. And of course, then they think, oh, well, I'm great. And they go to their first show and they get crucified. And then they're very confused. And that's why a second level is hard.
Yeah. You just brought up, and I think you might have just helped me click together, but let me ask you a question and see. So let's imagine there's a rider riding around the arena, and they're riding counterclockwise around the arena. So the shoulders to the outside, the right shoulders out to the rail.
Okay.
And they think they're practicing shoulder in. Mm-hmm. So from the rider's perspective, they feel like they're riding with the shoulder in, but let's say instead of shoulder in, it's actually a little bit more of a leg yield.
Okay.
I was reading one of the dressage books, which I'm going to have to pull up. I can't remember which one. And they said one exercise that was really great was to ride shoulder in and then to go straight across so ride shoulder in, and then go straight forward and push off and look for that impulsion. But I think if I'm hearing you right, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because this just occurred to me, if you were actually riding leg yield instead of shoulder in, I'm going to guess that push off and straight across the arena would be very challenging.
Well, yeah, because if you're riding leg yield down the arena with the haunches to the outside and the shoulders to the inside, a lot of times what's happening is the hind legs are falling out.
Yes.
And then when you want to go off on that diagonal to go straight, the hind legs are not behind the shoulders of the horse enough to make that push off very graceful and useful. So when people begin to ride shoulder in, most of the time they think, oh, I put my inside leg back and I push the haunches out. And then I have the angle that I'm supposed to have, because they think, oh, if I have a 30-degree angle and I'm going down the wall, I have shoulder in. Yep. But shoulder in is about bend and engagement, and leg yield is about yielding the haunches. That's why it's called leg yield. So, I think leg yield is a very useful concept for helping the horse understand that he can move his haunches in response to the rider's leg. But the reality is, when you want to teach collection, you have to control the shoulders, not move the haunches. If you're moving the haunches around, like in a leg yield, basically what's happening is the horse has to be on the forehand a little bit more. Whereas when you are actually moving the shoulders either in front of the haunches or to the inside of the haunches, you are making that horse hold his haunches where you want them and transfer more weight to them so that he can move his shoulders. And that's the difference. And that's why people struggle so much trying to get to second level.
Yeah, that was an excellent description of that. And it, like I said, in that exercise in that book, it didn't say why, but I could feel when I was doing it, I was like, ooh, I like that. you just clicked together how that would actually be a great diagnostic tool for whether you were truly, kind of whether you were doing a leg yield basically. But something else you just said there that's really interesting is, especially coming from the Western background, Western world and background there is a heavy emphasis on moving the hip. Mm-hmm. And I believe you're correct in the fact that it does put them a little bit more on the front end. And one of the places that I'm really having an interesting time playing with it is actually in a lot of the lead changes, because there was this question in my mind, like, why do the Western horses look like they have a much flatter lead change? Like, it's actually ideal in a lot of the Western classes that you can't see the lead change happen. Like, if you were just watching the top line, you almost wouldn't know it happened.
There's no jump in it.
Right. And that's exactly the opposite of, like, I go to and they're like, jump. We want to see this jump. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, okay, the legs, like, how exactly is this working? And what's totally exactly what you just said is that the difference of displacing the haunches, you'll get the lead change, but you flatten it out because you kind of, it's not going to have the powerful jump.
The horse steps over to the inside a little bit, and that is what replaces the jump. Whereas in regular dressage, you want the horse to jump step straight through.
Yes,
all the way through to the front. Whereas the lead change on the Western horse, if you move that hip over, most horses will change.
Yeah.
A lead change is one thing. A flying lead change is another.
Well, let me tell you, when I started changing things on Willow, we got some flying lead changes. She was slightly offended that we were changing all the rules, but actually it's been crazy amounts of fun. Because right now, as she is, I can actually switch back and forth and ride her different. So I can put her on a loose rein, ride her the way that I would in like a reining pattern. And I could have her change, in that original way I'd taught her, which was a little bit flatter. But I can also gather her up into both of my reins and I can bring everything straighter. And she's like, oh, you want one of these? Okay. And I'm like, prepare for jump.
Well, I think there's that brings up to me something that's really important in the difference in the goals of Western dressage and regular competition dressage. Mm-hmm. The gold standard in regular dressage is this great big warm blood that has a lot of suspension, and they're looking for the maximum expression of the gaits. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes that so beautiful when you see that huge floating trot across the arena, or the big jumping pirouettes or flying changes, that kind of stuff. But you take that horse and take him into a herd of cattle. Not getting them.
Things are scattering pretty fast.
Yeah. So our stock horses are bred to have quiet gaits and to keep their heads low. That doesn't mean they don't engage their haunches. They just keep their shoulders low to keep a lower profile so that they don't upset the livestock. And when you rope on a horse, you don't want that horse to have his shoulders real high, because when that cow hits the end of the rope, you got to keep the shoulders relatively low or you're going to get pulled over.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's the thing that makes me a little different from most dressage riders, is that I recognize the different needs of the different disciplines as being valid, not one's great and the other's bad. Mm-hmm. And so when we're working with Western dressage horses, we are looking for an animal that is quiet and comfortable to ride and is useful to ride. I don't think I would take the average warm blood out and I mean, it would be good for their brains to work cows, but I don't know that they'd be particularly good at it. And likewise, I wouldn't take a roping bred stock horse who's built hip high for a reason. And that reason is so that he can keep his shoulders low and not get pulled over. I wouldn't take that horse in the dressage ring and expect him to do what the warm blood horse does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet we can still have impulsion from each of those horses. It just translates different. It looks different. But that you still can get the horse to push through his stop line.
Well, thank you for seeing the value in both, because I think that helps open up the world, and it just helps us all realize, like, I totally am with you. I completely agree that there's value in all of these different things. And then, the horses can benefit from going out and doing the different jobs, but it's also not fair to compare one that's, a lot of times if you take it back into like the dog world and you're like, if you want a herding dog, you probably don't start with a lab, like it's like certain dogs were bred to be certain ways, and we've done that with horses, and that's just fair to observe some of those differences. And then it's fun to play and try to break rules and stuff, but not at the expense of the horse by judging it against, a different breed standard or different competition
I see
standard.
people that have horses that are conformationally not well suited for upper level dressage, but they have this shining goal in front of them.
Yep.
And, I'm not going to tell them, get a different horse, but I'm going to say to them, be realistic on what you can expect from your horse. And don't be unfair, because if you are unrealistic, you're going to break them down.
Right. Mentally and physically. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If people want to find you online, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me at classicallegacydressage.com. I have a website that is kind of divides up into two. One is the classical side, the other is the Western dressage side. And there's lots of fun pictures and actually some video and things like that on there to kind of give you a taste.
Very good.
You can find me on Facebook at Frances Carbonnel or on Classical Legacy Dressage. And I also have a little plug to make for a triumvirate that I've been working on with Simone Windeler and Jill Lee. We have a company called Equestrian Freestyle. And we have a lot of fun designing freestyle. Jillian is an extraordinary musician, and she has all the bells and whistles technology to do wonderful music editing. And Simone is a Western dressage and a regular dressage judge, so she understands how to create things from the standpoint of the judge so that it's easy to judge, and you maximize your horse's strong points and minimize his weak points. And then there's me, who likes the theater. So we try to put stuff together that is entertaining, but also that can get you the marks. So, those are the fun things that I tinker with. I get bored if I do the same thing for too long. So,
well, I definitely want to have you back on for the freestyle episode to talk more about the whole choreography and all of that, because I can definitely tell that you have fun with that. So people can jump on and find you on YouTube and watch some of those videos. And I will put links in the show notes to all of these places so you can jump on and watch. But thank you again for joining me.
Well, thank you. It has been really a pleasure, Stacy, and I hope I get to see you this year at Worlds again.
Well, Total Saddle Fit has the cinch that you've been looking for your Western dressage saddle. The shoulder relief cinch actually changes the position and angle of the billets to prevent the saddle tree from interfering with the shoulder. The center of the cinch is set forward to sit in the horse's natural girth groove, while the sides of the cinch are cut back to meet the billets 2 inches behind where the horse's natural girth groove lies. This brings the latigos from angling forward to becoming perpendicular to the ground, which reduces the saddle's tendency to be pulled forward into the shoulders. With horses that have shoulder interference without angled billets, it simply moves the billets back to keep the saddle further away from the shoulders. The secondary benefit to this shape is the cutback at the elbows. This gives more room for elbow movement as well and prevents galls in the elbow area. You can find the shoulder relief cinch at TotalSaddleFit.com. That's TotalSaddleFit.com.
Thanks again to Dini Swanson, Simone Windeler, and Frances Carbonnel for joining me on today's show. In next month's episode, we will be discussing straightness. If you're interested in hearing more from me, I have a podcast, and you can find it on your podcast player by searching Stacy Westfall Horse Podcast. Or you could join my private Western Dressage Facebook group. And I also have a YouTube series where you can learn more about Western Dressage, and I've uploaded full tests on there with the judges' comments and the scores shown while you watch me ride the test. You can also find the show notes and links to today's guests on the website at dressageradio.com. Like us on Facebook, just search Dressage Radio Show. And don't forget to check out all the other shows on the Horse Radio Network at horseradionetwork.com.